And then I wanted to tell you all a little bit about him and why we were so excited that he was going to speak tonight. He was born on, somebody else I need to admit. People coming late, they had to be admitted late. He was born on Stonewall Jackson's 143rd birthday, and he was, of course, named after Robert E. Lee. And so it seemed very logical for him to then get involved with the study of the Civil War, war between the states. But it wasn't until he was 24 years old. I don't know where his parents were, but it wasn't until he was 24 years old that he realized he had ancestors who had fought for the South while researching for the first time in the National Archives. He's always been drawn to visual history, to photos, art, artifacts, wants to know what the past looks like always. And when he got his first library card at 5 years old, he didn't know how to read yet, but he memorized the Dewey Decimal System so he could check the books out. I'm not quite sure about this story. It sounds like kind of far-fetched to me, but we're going to have to accept it. His obsession to the war led him to reenacting in 1981, and he still does that. In 1985, he won a Congressional Art Award for a painting of Confederate soldiers, and it hung in the Longworth building on Capitol Hill for a year. And then in 1991, he became an intern in Washington, D.C. for the National Park Service, and he got to meet Ed Bars. And this group was chosen to investigate the preservation of crisis in our battlefields. He learned a lot there about how to preserve our nation's history. So he's worked on several Hollywood productions related to the war, from ABC's North and South to TNT's Gettysburg and Andersonville, to many episodes of the Civil War Journal on the History Channel. He's been a professional researcher since 1991, worked with many different organizations for that. He's been featured in all the major news outlets, news organizations, and right now he's transcribing Alexander Hunter's 1866 manuscript that he's discovered. He's transcribing accounts from the 2017 Charlottesville protests and his father's World War II accounts he has 25 hours of recordings of his father being with the 1st Cavalry. So next year he intends to start a podcast to talk about various things. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and I've asked him to unmute, and he should be able to give us his talk. And I can also allow him to share his slides if he wishes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
There he is on screen.
Hi. I want to thank Martha and Rob for getting a hold of me and asking me to speak. It was kind of last minute, and I have so many things on my plate. It was difficult to get slides together. And then my computer's been working at a snail pace for the last several days, and I rebooted it, and it didn't help it. So I sent slides, but I got to defend myself. I didn't send them 5 minutes before 7. You said to send them before 6, and the last one I sent was at 5:59. So I have to cover myself with this.
Okay.
But I apologize. And what I'll say right now is the most important things. And if you all that are listening, if you want to go online as I'm talking, we can do it that way. And I think that would probably be easier because I'm talking off my phone, and it's going to be hard to do the slides. But if you just look up Alexander Hunter images, you'll find them. I think there's a black athlete named Alexander Hunter as well. But you'll see photos of Hunter. One is a wartime photo from his book, Johnny Reb and Billy Yank, which was published by the Neal Publishing Company in 1905. And Neal Publishing did a lot of publishing. So what I want to talk about is Alexander Hunter principally and his connection to Arlington Cemetery. I've been involved with the Arlington Cemetery fight for about 2.5, 3 years, and it's been a painful roller coaster, seesaw thing. There's times when, I've been close to tears because it's hard to believe that these things could be ripped up. And even from an art perspective, just to destroy art or remove the art, and talking about Confederate art, the Lee Monument at Charlottesville was melted down. Removing the monuments is one thing, which I don't necessarily agree with moving them, but destroying them changes a lot of things, and I think it's very ghoulish, and it pains me. I never thought I would live in a country where these things would happen. 20, 30 years ago when Civil War was such a big pop culture thing, a few people were warning about it. I do remember a few people, but most people didn't see any of this coming. I certainly didn't. And I never meant any harm with going to all the Confederate monuments and monuments in general that I've been to. I never meant any harm, and I've never met anybody at all the hundreds of monuments that I've gone to where there was any crazy person that a lot of times the argument is these are magnets of white supremacy. And it's like, well, what does that mean? I'm not sure what that means anymore. But it's really disturbing. And I thought about the Arlington Monument in particular, the Reconciliation Monument, was particularly worrisome because Arlington Cemetery is the most famous cemetery in America, if not, the world, I don't know. But if the Reconciliation Monument, of all things, can be taken down as it was by the previous administration, a Confederate monument in a cemetery, we thought a few years ago was a safe thing. When people were saying these need to be removed from the courthouses because they're offensive, we thought, well, at least there would be a refuge in a cemetery. Well, that's not the case if the Reconciliation Monument, the brainchild of a Union veteran and President William McKinley, if that goes down, then that sets precedent for monuments of that ilk to be torn down in cemeteries. Important thing, cemeteries. So the precedent is what I'm really worried about. And so I've been involved. I've raised money. I've put on events to raise money. And some of the leadership in the group I'm involved in, which is called Defend Arlington. You can go to defendarlington.org, or you can find them on Facebook. But they're led by what I would say affectionately steel magnolias, some tough women that I love. And the legal bills have been upwards of $200,000 to fight the Department of Defense under the previous administration. And thankfully, the group has been able to pay about $175,000 of that debt off, which is very impressive to me. And so the current administration, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who lives locally to me, or has a house here locally, he surprisingly announced that the monument was going back up. And we were surprised by it. So maybe some of the letters that we sent to his private address in Tennessee, maybe they got to him. But So now under the Defense Authorization Act of 2026, there's Democrat leadership that wants to strike out this re-erection of this monument. And so that's kind of where we're at. And what you can do, well, one is to give money for the legal defense, because we still have 25,000, and it'll probably be more to pay for this. But the other thing is to contact your congressmen and your senators, and also specifically Mike Rogers and Tommy Tuberville. They're both in Alabama. One's on the House Armed Services Committee, and one's on the Senate Armed Services Committee. They hold the purse strings, and so it's important for them to be approached. There's also going to be an event at where the monument was at Arlington, October 25th. And if you're interested in going to that or buying a wreath to help support the funding of these causes, you can buy a wreath, and you can find that at Defend Arlington. But one of the problems with this, even if the monument goes up, it's under a 50-year lease. And so both parties in 50 years have to agree for the monument to stay up. Well, government shifts like the wind. And so we're worried about that. And so we don't want it to be a lease. And also, the way the whole thing was handled is in legal dispute.
If I could interject here just a minute. Could you give us some background on the monument? Give us a bit of a history on the monument?
Yeah. Well, it was the brainchild of Union veteran and president at the time, William McKinley. And the reconciliation effort in the United States was not a simple thing, and it didn't happen overnight. Pardon me. Around the time in the 1890s, things began to change, partially due to some nationalism due to the Spanish-American War. And so you'll see, sons and, you'll see veterans like Joe Wheeler and Fitz Lee and Matthew Butler leading federal troops, United States troops, former Confederate generals. And there's a reconciliation feeling. You'll see it in the video footage later in the early 20th century of the veterans shaking hands over the wall at Gettysburg, those sorts of things, which didn't include people of African descent. I mean, or rarely in some of the parades and stuff, you'll see it. But so the Reconciliation Monument was designed as a national monument of reconciliation between the sections. And so William McKinley challenged the UDC and other Southern organizations to raise the money. And like the UDC often has done, they kicked behind doing it. And they raised a lot of money, and they commissioned Confederate veteran, VMI cadet, veteran of Newmarket, Moses Ezekiel, Jewish Confederate veteran, to sculpt it. And he sculpts a lot of great monuments. I just saw one up at Johnson's Island prison camp up in Ohio, and I didn't realize it was Ezekiel till I was up on it. But Ezekiel was the sculptor of it, and Ezekiel sculpted this monument. It was his favorite monument of all the monuments he did, and he wanted to be buried at the base of it, and he was. And I guess there's roughly about 500 Confederates buried there in Section 16 of Arlington Cemetery. And bringing the veterans there was part of, to have the ceremonies, the burials there was part of the reconciliation effort. And so by about 1914 in June, the monument is unveiled by, I believe, Woodrow Wilson. And the guy I'm talking about tonight, Alexander Hunter, I just found this out last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. He's the first Confederate buried in the Confederate Circle after the monument was unveiled. And I just found that out, and I thought that was neat. But I've been to that monument, taken photos of it. I've lived up in Arlington. I lived up there 23 years. But it's always been a place of peace. And so this narrative that it's an extension of white supremacy, I mean, yeah, you can make argument for it, and I can probably make argument against it. And what is white supremacy, where do these things go? One of the people that's going to speak at the October 25th event at Arlington for the re-erection ceremony kind of kickoff is going to be a congressman, Clyde, I believe. And one of the people speaking is a Chinese immigrant named Xi Van Fleet, which you may have heard about. She went viral protesting against the Loudoun County, Virginia School Board for, I believe it was hiding a transgender rapist, if I'm not mistaken, a repeated one. And so she spoke out at the school board, and she spoke about sensitive things like critical race theory and transgender stuff and things like that that are always just weird topics to me. But she said this is very interesting. She went viral and she wrote a book. I think it's called Mao's America or Maoist America. But she said these are the embryonic beginnings of similarities with Mao's Cultural Revolution. And I thought that was very interesting that it's been repackaged. And so I think about that more. I'm not saying I'm totally sold on it, but it's something to consider when you see the monuments being ripped down by mobs of, I think, well-heeled kids that are trying to atone for their lives growing up in private communities, gated communities, and private schools, or that something like that. They missed out on the 1960s protests or something. And I'm not saying they're not well-intended. Some of them probably are. It's just that I don't agree with them. And the violent nature makes me think that often their behaviors are repugnant. I feel that I want to mentally fortify myself to fight for these things, especially this monument in particular. And I would hope you would join me in that, because it takes people. It takes people for the advocacy, and it takes people to raise money and to pay for legal bills. But that's kind of the background of the monument. Now, I don't know how much more time I have, but Alexander Hunter, my favorite Confederate, I was turned on to by my mentor, Brian Pohanka, the late Brian Pohanka, who was a guru of the 5th New York Zouaves, a pro-Union man, Army of Potomac man, but Brian believed that the Army in Northern Virginia was the best fielded army in the modern world, which I thought was very interesting from a pro-Union guy. But Brian turned me on to Alexander Hunter's unpublished account. And I'm publishing that just coming up now, finally, after decades. I'm publishing it in the winter issue of Civil War Monitor. So that should be out in about, I'd say, 6 weeks or so. And I wrote about Hunter in America's Civil War magazine, 2 articles on the march from 2nd Manassas to Sharpsburg, and then the second article on Sharpsburg. So the first 2 articles are, of the 3, it's the middle one and the third I published first, and now the first one I'm publishing last, if that makes any sense. So what I'd like to do about Hunter is just give you a real brief idea about him. He was born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1843, and grew up at his plantation home called Abingdon, not to be confused with Abingdon, Virginia. Abingdon Plantation is where Reagan National Airport is today. And the foundation of the plantation home, Abingdon, is still there between 2 parking garages. So you can actually find it, and there's interpretation there on the house. And if we have time, remind me at the end, and we'll talk about Abingdon post-war. It's very interesting. Alexander Hunter grew up in the Alexandria area, joined Company A of the Alexandria Riflemen, which would become a part of the 17th Virginia Infantry, a favorite regiment of mine. I'd say 4 or 5 of the companies, of the 10 companies in the 17th, are from Alexandria. So they're orphans real quick. When the Federal Army moves into Alexandria, these guys can't go back and visit their families there, which is interesting. So Hunter writes this manuscript in 1866, so it's fairly fresh. It's a reminiscence as opposed to a diary, but it's a fresh reminiscence, which is very important to consider. This reminiscence of 1866 is a lot different than what's published by Neal Publishing in 1905. So on let's see, Monday, well, he writes several articles. He writes a high private sketch of Sharpsburg for the Southern Historical Society papers. Actually writes 2 articles, and then also writes in the Baltimore Sun as well. So Hunter is at First Manassas Blackburn's Ford. He fights at the Battle of Williamsburg, a big battle that's forgotten about because we think of it in colonial history terms. But the reality is that the Civil War battle there is substantial, and there are members of the 17th Virginia buried in a churchyard there at Williamsburg. And so Hunter will fight in the 7 days. He'll get captured at Frazier's Farm or Glendale, which is an underrated fight. I think that's June 30th of 62. He gets sent to prison, gets exchanged fairly quick, and joins back up with the 17th Virginia in what would become the Second Manassas Campaign. And so this is what I'm going to read to you. This is unpublished stuff until coming up in December, in the winter issue of Civil War Monitor. So listen to this. This is the way he begins this chapter on Second Manassas. The day on which perhaps the destiny of the new world would be changed had arrived at last. Pretty heavy stuff. Coming events cast their shadows before. On inquiry, we found that our brigade had taken another road in the night and were some miles behind. And so we got beneath the shade of the trees and amused ourselves by watching the long line of soldiers passing by. About noon, believing that the 17th Virginia was nearby, we went in search, and in an hour or two found it, halted in a small cornfield, which even in that short a time had been stripped of every ear of corn, and as fires were not allowed to be built, they were devoured raw. So I'm just going to break from it for a moment. So Hunter is part of Longstreet's wing of Lee's army. Jackson had fought on the 28th and 29th at Second Manassas, and now Longstreet has gotten through Thoroughfare Gap and is coming in on Jackson's right or to his south. And Longstreet will deploy about 28,000 troops and mass them, and they'll be fighting on the 29th as they're deploying, but the big assaults will be on the 30th. And this is what Hunter's talking about. This is August 30th of 62. And if anybody at home wants to go to like the American Battlefield Trust maps on Second Manassas, you can use those for August 30th. And when Longstreet's troops begin to deploy, they'll deploy south of the Warrenton Turnpike along the Lewis Farm Lane for the most part. So your people, Hoods, will be anchored on the south side of the Warrenton Turnpike. So they are going to guide left on the Warrenton Turnpike as they move up. And the Warrenton Turnpike's kind of a west, east, or northeast, southwest kind of direction. So it'll be Hoods, and then it'll be Evans, Shanks Evans brigade. It'll be Kemper, his division, Montgomery Course. It'll be Drayton's brigade under Jenkins. Under David Rumps Jones. Micah Jenkins will be there. Various brigades. Eppa Hunton's brigade will be there as well. And they'll deploy north to south, Hood being at the most northern point, facing east, and they'll wait there until about 3 p.m. when Longstreet will issue the orders. And then they'll begin to move out at about 4 p.m., make contact with the Federals at 4:15. And so let me pick back up again. So this is back around 4 p.m. on the 30th. Everything appeared calm and peaceful, and the soldiers dispersed in groups, spending their time as the several fancies directed them. The forenoon wore slowly away, and still we kept our attitude of lazy waiting. About 3 or 4 o'clock, we heard the heavy rattling of musketry and the loud report of the guns, and Colonel Marie's clear voice rang out, "Fall in now, men. Steady, lads. Steady, 17th. Colonel Marie is Morton Marie. You've heard of Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg. The house there, the red house on top, iconic house. That was where Marie was born. This colonel was born in that house. Let's see. Steady men, steady. The line was soon formed, and we commenced marching towards the scene of action. On our way, the regiment halted, and every man was compelled to discard his knapsack, blanket, or overcoat, and they were deposited under a large pile, and guards were set over them. This stripping for the fight showed everyone that the time for action had come, and the stern compression of the lip and the determined flash of the eye as they tightened the belt of their cartridge boxes spoke louder than words that their minds were made up to do or to die. The men having deposited all their equipment, the line was formed, and we continued our march. On our way, we stopped by a high Virginia snake fence. Every man seized a rail, and in a moment the fence vanished. We kept on until we reached the field of action, and the firing was now fast and furious. The regiment was halted, the line formed and dressed, and Colonel Marie dismounted, and drawing his sword, placed himself in position at the head of the regiment, and his loud, clear tones rang sharply through the air. "Forward, God's center, march! Dress by the colors, men!" We started, and never did I see the regiment march so beautifully and keep their line so steady, even on parade. The firing became heavy. The balls and shells whistled over our heads, and the calm, cool voice of the colonel could be heard. "Steady, men. Keep cool, boys. Steady, steady." And all signs of flurry or haste would disappear, and the magnificent discipline showed itself. On we advanced until we nearly reached a small outbuilding. Now, this small outbuilding, I believe, is to be an outbuilding of the Chin House on Chin Ridge, which is a probably not all that well-known area of the battle, but should be based on the research that I've been doing. Until we reached a small outbuilding, when suddenly a regiment of the enemy sprang up from behind a wall and let us have a withering volley at point-blank pistol range. Now, that volley, I think, is from a stone wall that was there, and I believe the federal troops that he's going to be talking about here, and this gets very confusing, but I believe these are Ohio troops, maybe 55th Ohio. I think they're a Cincinnati outfit. But this is a McLean's Ohio Brigade, or McLean. I pronounce it McLean. I don't know what the correct pronunciation was. At point-blank pistol range. We were not expecting it, and it came upon us with the suddenness of a thunderbolt. Colonel Marie fell, his leg fractured by a bullet. Many were killed by the volley. All discipline was now at an end, and individual bravery fully made up for the deficiency. We all sprang forward with one ringing yell, the officers waving their swords and the men standing still, only long enough to fire off their guns. Though we did not fire by command or by volley, yet our salute was nonetheless a deadly on that account. Every man took aim before his finger pressed the trigger, and the ground in our front was literally lined with the blue. Still, they stood their ground. It was a Western regiment composed of hardy, rough men of the far West. Had it been a New England regiment, it would have broken at our first fire. Not very complimentary to New England troops. But I believe this is to be the Ohio troops at this point. And he'll run into the other troops coming up. Again, this is, and I just want to step back for a second. We're talking again about August 30th, 1862. It was Ed Barth who turned me on to this when I was an intern with the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission. It was this, is that the true high tide of the Confederacy, we hear about it in popular culture being Gettysburg, but that's not the case. It's in the summer and fall of '62. there's about 7 Confederate offensives going on, from Confederate troops moving from Arkansas into Missouri, Confederates trying to retake Baton Rouge, Confederate 2 armies trying to retake Corinth, Braxton Bragg moving into Kentucky. Kirby Smith has a division right in front of Cincinnati, and he swears in a Confederate governor in Lexington. Humphrey Marshall is moving with a brigade towards the Ohio River. Albert Gallatin Jenkins is in Ohio with 1,500 Confederate cavalry, well before John Hunt Morgan. William Loring is moving up or down the Ohio Valley towards Ohio with 5,600 troops and retakes Charleston. And then you have Robert E. Lee crossing the Potomac. And there's other offensives as well. But this is the true high tide. And when you think again about August 30th, you're really focusing on the focal point of the high tide in a lot of ways, because these guys are just outside of D.C. and this is an avalanche that's happening to John Pope's Federal Army at 2nd Manassas. Longstreet is hitting Pope's left, and we're going to find out more about this in a moment. But August 30th, hundreds of miles away over in Richmond, Kentucky, over 3,000 Federals are surrendering to Patrick Cleburne and Kirby Smith. So you have a massive Confederate offensives going on to do 2 things. One, you can probably guess, is to affect European recognition. They want England in particular involved. And the other thing is congressional elections coming up. If Confederate victory on the battlefield can happen, it's going to affect the elections. So keep that in mind. So again, August 30th, we're here. We're at the high point of the high tide, perhaps. It was give and take for a short time, and at last, with a wild yell that rose high above the din of battle, we rushed right into them, right through them. They broke and scattered. Sam Coleman of Company E performed an act of daring that ought to have secured his commission on the spot. Rushing in alone among the retreating enemy, he seized the colors of from the hand of a sergeant. Now the colors are the 11th Pennsylvania, and those colors exist in Harrisburg. And that flag was donated to the 11th Pennsylvania early on in the war by the women of Martinsburg, Virginia. And this guy, Sam Coleman, captures the flag from the hand of a sergeant and brought it out safely as we were springing forward and firing. For heavy Federal reserves were advancing against us. Frank Ballinger of Company H jumped exactly before raising his gun to fire. Before he could bring it up to his face, he fell back in my arms, nerveless. I heard him cry out. Then I heard a rustling in his throat. Placing the canteen to his lips, I turned it up, but he only took one swallow. Then he was dead. Turning him over, I undid his jacket and saw that the ball had hit him in the abdomen, coming out of his back. Poor fellow. He unconsciously saved my life, but for jumping before the fatal ball would have accomplished its mission on me. But I had no time to indulge in my feelings of sorrow. The battle was now raging. Both sides had brought up their real strength and were striving like 2 giants, one to overcome the other. Lying Frank gently down, I started forward, firing as I went. I could see none of my company. As our different reserves would rush by, they would join in the advance and become scattered. Seeing right in front of me 2 or 3 large brigades advancing with cheers, their burnished arms glistening in the sun, their stars and stripes fluttering in the breeze, and their lines superbly dressed, I could not resist the involuntary cry of admiration, even though they were enemies. Yet their martial appearance was truly terrific. At their front were the drummers beating the pas de charge, the first and last time I ever heard that inspiring drum roll on the battlefield. I began to think that it was time for me to get away from there, and I was just turning around when right behind me I heard a shout, a savage yell from hundreds of throats. And turning, I saw a brigade in gray coming in at a terrific pace, their line irregular and broken, the red cross shaking to and fro. Forming with them, I kept on at the top of my speed, and the 2 opposing forces met in full career. A heavy volley on one side, accompanied by a hearty hurrah, a scream of rage with the dropping fire, one on the other. We got within 10 yards of them, and they broke. And in a second, they were running without order or form for the rear. Their guns were thrown away. They would unstrap their knapsacks as they ran. Their hats would fly off, but nothing stopped them. The brigade did not suffer much. The balls generally flew over our heads, but it seemed as if every shot told. The progress of their flight could be traced in the blue uniforms. Bang, bang, whiz, whiz, away flew the iron tempest over us, causing the boldest to involuntarily duck their head at the ringing shot, as the ringing shot flew screaming by. Above us, on a gentle elevation, some 600 yards off, was an 8-gun battery that was furiously firing, the guns hidden from view by a dense curtain of smoke, and nothing could be seen but the flash of the cannons. The fighting was now terrible in front, in rear, on our right, and on our left. The guns bellowed. The musketry crackled like some immense forest on fire. We could see nothing, hear nothing, but that hideous, never-ceasing pealing of the small arms. I cannot describe the combat, nor the plan. A soldier on the battlefield is nothing but an animated machine whose sole purpose is, and feelings, is to kill and destroy, and I can only give the scenes that came under my own eyes. And the battery that they're attacking is Lepian's main battery, and he says 8-gun battery. It's probably a 6-gun battery. Form into line, men, and the cry was taken up by the company officers, and under the heavy fire, the broken line was formed. I fell in and asked my next ranked man what regiment and brigade I was in. 4th Texas, Hood's Brigade, was his reply. Forward, Texans, charge that battery, I heard an officer say, and the whole line started at a walk, and then at a sling trot, and then in a maddening race. We neared the battery, and I remember that scene was the most impressive of my life, though the glimpses of only a second's duration. Yet it seemed untold time. The veil of smoke had slowly lifted, and we could see the muzzles of the cannons, their black, grim mouths pointing towards us. Beside them stood the gunners, and in the midst was a flag, a very small one, laying low, drooping on its staff. It was for a second, a horrid roar, then a shock that seemed to shake the very earth, then the dull thud of the balls as it tore its way through the bodies of the men, then the hiss of the grape, then the mangled screams and agony of rage. I looked around me. The ground was filled with the mangled dead and dying. Forward, boys, don't stop now, for the honor of the Lone Star State, an officer cried out in front of me, and they dashed forward. Another discharge, and men fell like leaves. But the gallant Texans did not stop even now. Nothing but a dilation could repulse them. As with a terrific battle cry, they dashed at the guns. All order was forgotten. Officers and privates were all together, each struggling to be the foremost. The last definite thing I remember were those wild men in gray crowding up to the batteries, some foaming at the mouth. They had run mad for the time. My memory is chaos. The fight with their infantry, the struggle around the cannon seems like the faint impression of a dream. And then I found myself seated astride a cannon with the Southern Cross waving in triumph. The regiment was gone. The brigade was gone. When, where, and how, I do not know. Nothing was there but the flag with its handle rammed in the ground and the lifeless forms of many of the gunners, their blue coats trimmed with red. The grass around the battery was burnt to a cinder and still smoking. I looked around me. I could see the enormous masses of the enemy's reserves rushing to the front, the batteries thundering with the thick rolling smoke that half hid everything from view. And still the infernal din continued. I got among our men at last, and in we went, hammer and tongs, hammer and tongs. It was load your musket and fire. The only orders the officers gave was fire low, men. Half of the time the smoke was so thick that we could not detect the blue forms of our enemies and could only tell where they were by their cheers and occasional glimpses we caught of their flag, which was ever and anon flaunted in its brilliant colors to view. We could tell that we were fighting their reserves, for their few their fire grew terrible, the hissing of the bullets incessant. And then it was that we played our old rebel trick on them, scattering so as to allow a farther interval between us. We laid flat on the ground, availing ourselves of any little inequality of the earth for our protection, and had the intense satisfaction of feeling much more safer and hearing the cries of those who were shot much less frequently. I happened to drop behind a dead Yankee, as I thought, but the very first time I fired, he opened his eyes and feebly said, "Sir, for the love of God, don't shoot over me. I never fired a shot." "The more fool you," I answered. "But where are you wounded?" He showed me his hand. A ball had pierced it and gone through his chest. Taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, I bound it around his hand. And the other wound I saw it was useless for me to attempt to bind up, especially under such a fire. I fixed his knapsack carefully under his head and was about to leave him when he handed me his canteen with his unwounded hand. I took it, and putting it to my lips, I found it was whiskey, but I took nonetheless a hearty pull on that account, however. And telling him to keep a stiff upper lip, I left him and crawled a little farther in advance, and striking against a large-sized stone, I loaded and fired. Seeing a Yankee haversack a short distance off, I crawled and got it, and found it contained some boiled beef and crackers. And lying behind that rock, in the middle of the bloodiest battle of the war, I fought and ate, first shooting my gun, then taking a mouthful, then loading, then firing, then eating. And never in my life did I ever have a meal, no matter how varied in its dishes, to give me half as much enjoyment as those hard crackers and that beef bone. But I never expect to eat another meal with such glorious surroundings as I did that one. Now, there's more to the account, but I think that might be an appropriate spot to end it, because I know that we're running out of time.
I thought that was just a stunning, beautifully written, incredible account of the horror and glories of war. So thank you for reading that, Rob. You have something to say?
Yes, Rob, it's obvious that Hunter was an accomplished writer, a man that wrote inspiring words and could deal with emotions and portray them in his writing. Tell us a little bit about what his life was like after the war and how he came to be the first soldier buried there at the monument.
Well, I think it's timing as far as being the first soldier buried there, because he dies on June 30th, 1914, and the unveiling of the monument's in early June. And I met when I was on a Defend Arlington phone call, I think it was last week, I mentioned this because I was just looking at the dates. I'm like, wow, this is so close. And so they checked up on it, and yes, he is indeed the first one buried after the monument went up. So I thought that was pretty neat. And Hunter was a prolific writer. He had studied the classics. I want to mention his writing, but I want to go back to his Abingdon plantation in a moment. His writing, he wrote a book called Women of a Debatable Land, and it's about women in the Fauquier County area dealing with the hardships of the war. It's a novel, but it's based on real firsthand accounts and to some degree. And Hunter is, I would say, affectionately unreconstructed. And his 1866 manuscript, I'm looking through, he's writing, and in cursive writing, which is pretty decent to decipher. And then he stops from his train of thought, and he writes, "I still hate Yankees." And then he goes back to writing again. So he's unreconstructed. He also, I haven't read this recently, this was a while ago, but when I was really first digging into Hunter, I found that he wrote some articles that I guess became syndicated in 65 or maybe 66 about Lincoln's assassination, and that some of you may know about, I think it's Bessie Hall or Hale, who was a the daughter of a senator. And Booth, I guess, he was quite a ladies' man, I guess, and but he had hots for her. And Robert Lincoln, I guess, and I'm not a Lincoln expert, so I'm doing a hatchet job on this. But Robert Lincoln stepped in and danced with her at a party that Booth was at, and Booth was enraged. Hunter writes about this in 65, 66 to some degree, and I think he might become an overnight sensation with some people because of the content of what he's writing about. And apparently there is cross references to this, but I'm not a Lincoln scholar at all. So Hunter does a lot of writing. He's a member of the Alexandria UCV camp. The UDC Hall in Alexandria owns the building still. They got a great museum in there. Hunter will later, by the way, wartime, Hunter will transfer to the 4th Virginia Cavalry, which is a unit I'm really getting into lately. And he'll fight at Spotsylvania, my favorite Civil War battlefield, in the 4th Virginia Cavalry. So Hunter's, and he's captured 3 or 4 times, and he breaks out of prison, I think 2 times at least. On the suspension bridge over the Ohio River in Wheeling, which is still there, he escapes from the crowd. They're marching him over the river to get on railroad cars to go to Camp Chase, and he gets into the crowd and breaks away. I mean, he's kind of like the Indiana Jones of the Confederacy in a lot of ways. But what I wanted to say about Abingdon, so Hunter's plantation, he can't pay the taxes on Abingdon because you have to pay him in person during the war. He can't go because he's a Confederate soldier. He can't pay his taxes in person because he's a Confederate soldier. So he loses Abingdon because you have to pay in person. So he sues the federal government after the war, and it goes to the Supreme Court. And he has 3 lawyers. One is future president and Union veteran James A. Garfield. One of Hunter's lawyers is a former Union general and future president James A. Garfield. It goes to the Supreme Court, and Hunter wins. And I believe Abingdon burns like in the 1930s, some sort of fire. But Hunter, to me, there's so many different things that can stimulate you into Civil War history or various things. For me, it's first-person accounts. I like federal accounts, but I really like Confederate accounts. I gravitate to them more. And I've generated I'd say in the last 5 or 10 years, more of an affection for Hood's brigade. It's Ed Barce's favorite brigade in the Army of Northern Virginia. And I think I have an ancestor, collateral, Magnus Hodge in the 4th Texas, because my kinfolk are out in West Louisiana and East Texas around the time of San Jacinto. They fight at San Jacinto, 4 of them.
That was fascinating. Okay, Hal has got. I'm going to unmute. I think you can unmute yourself, Hal. I believe you can. This is not in alphabetical order, and I have to move down. Here we go. Here's Hal. Asked to unmute. He raised his hand.
Hello, Robert. Can you hear me? Everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, Robert. Okay. Now you're going to publish these writings from Alexander Hunter. You're going to put them in the Monitor. Is that correct?
Well, I think ideally I'd like to do a book. The problem with the manuscript is it's not complete. It's fragmented because he took parts of the manuscript out to write articles for newspapers, and I believe they just weren't put back in. For instance, his stuff on Sharpsburg, most of the stuff that I published of his Sharpsburg stuff is not unpublished. Only the first part of it is unpublished. Now, all of Second Manassas in its entirety has never been published. John Hennessy used a few sentences. Scott Patchen used a couple paragraphs. And what I read used maybe half of the Second Manassas account. So this is the first time in its entirety Hunter's Second Manassas account is published. And I wrote about also Hunter at marching from Second Manassas to Sharpsburg. That was just a whole article there. And he crosses, he says it in one time he says he crosses at White's Ford, and then a historian told me that's not correct. And Hunter gets some things wrong here and there, but just his delivery, you know, he talks about, you know, combat being daguerreotyped on his mind. Daguerreotyped on his mind, you know,
Wow.
interesting. But I'm going to be doing more with the Monitor, and I want to get into more of the 4th Virginia Cavalry and Hunter fighting between the Wilderness and Spotsylvania Courthouse along the Brock Road, which is an area I'm very interested in being involved with more saving. Of course, you know, at the Brock Road Orange Plank intersection, of course, the Texans, you know, the Texas story there is just so superb. But the Brock Road connectivity between Wilderness and Spotsylvania, I'd like to see more of that protected.
Robert, let me ask you real quick. Okay, the manuscripts, are you, you said you might be publishing a book on when, or is there a way for us to possibly get copies of this? I had ancestors at Spotsylvania, and I had them at Wilderness. I had them all over the place. I have them with Hood at Sharpsburg. I mean,
wow. Yeah. Well, I would just say my website is, I'm revamping my website. It got stale, and so I'm revamping it. But you know, you can search me online and probably find me. I mean, the easiest way to get a hold of me, I guess, is via email, which is just my full name at Yahoo.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Robert Lee at Yahoo.
Robert Lee Hodge at Yahoo.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
That's easy. Yeah, yeah. But what regiments were your ancestors in?
Oh, God.
You said you had ancestors in Hoods, but what other regiments?
Oh, well, 42nd Virginia,
Oh, okay.
Culp's Hill. They were at Culp's Hill.
Yeah.
22nd, the 32nd, the
Wow.
the 13th, the 54th. It just goes on and on. I'm in my
Wow.
as far as my history, I'm very blessed. You know, I've had so many. I've got probably close to 30 ancestors.
Wow.
Spread out, all in the Eastern Theater, all in Army in Northern Virginia,
Right.
North Carolina, Virginia. So, you know, with Pender, with Scales, Gettysburg, everywhere. So, anyway, I'm going to email you, Robert Lee Hodge at Yahoo. And I'm always, this is why I learned so much from guys like you. And you know, it's just that it helps me with my presentations and my lineage. And I'll
Sure.
say that and I'll shut up. You know. So thank you.
No,
sir.
no, I appreciate your enthusiasm. It's neat to know that you have so many relatives that you can document in the war.
Yeah, believe me, I'm a member of the Lee Society. I'm the commander in California, Military Order Stars and Bars. I'm coming to see Martha and Glenn in a few weeks for the scholarly seminar. I love Hood, so it just goes on and on, man. Anyway.
One of the articles I wrote, and I wrote part of it in Emerging Civil War, Chris Mikowski's thing. I was writing for him initially, and one of the things I wrote was following Evander Law's Alabama Brigade in '63 from Raccoon Ford to Gettysburg. Well, they're in the same division with Hood's guys.
Yes.
So I was on the same roads, and so I followed every road and deciphered. They didn't go down this road. They had to have gone down this road. The OR say they went here, you know, that kind of thing. And that was probably about, I'd say 12,000 words maybe. But it was just on the march. It wasn't even about any of the battle. It was just going through the terrain that they went through and talking about preservation. The article, you can get some of it on Mikowski's Emerging Civil War. It's called Yellow Hammers and Environmentalism.
Well, All right, I appreciate it. I'll try to I'll contact you and try to get as much as I can. And
Yeah, yeah.
I took a private tour at Gettysburg on Hood, and it was fantastic. They were late getting to the field. Laws and Hood were late, and anyway, the trail and what they went through, and it was just amazing.
Right.
One of the okay, all right. So thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
I'm happy to tell you all that in April, Hood's Brigade Association is sponsoring a tour actually to 1st and 2nd Manassas, Spotsylvania, and
Hmm.
Fredericksburg. And you'll be getting information about that on my MailChimps that I send out. So I hope a lot of you will think about coming. Looks like Hal's got he's got his finger up. He's going to be there. And so Robert Lee, I was really impressed with the man that you were Hunter that you were reading about. It was very exciting. Rob, did you have anything more to say?
Well, I wanted to ask you, Rob, how did you first learn about Alexander Hunter? And since a number of the chapters that you read from have never been published before.
Right. Well, I mentioned Brian Pohanka, who was really big into the Civil War and preservation. And he met up with me at Chin Ridge. He said he knew I liked Confederate stuff, and not that he didn't like it, but he knew that I'd appreciate it even more. And so he turned me on to it. And so we walked the ground, and he read the account to me. And Brian was like I said, a mentor, but also like a big brother. He took me under his wing and was very helpful to me. But I had been hesitating. I had been hesitant to write about some of the stuff that Hunter says is a little racy, and I hesitated on it because I liked Hunter so much. Hunter talks about when they crossed the Potomac. He says in his book White's Ford, but it might not be White's Ford. Most of these Army crosses there. But he said that they were going to sing Maryland, My Maryland when they got to the other side, because they saw themselves as liberators from the federal despot's heel. And he said there was a brass band on the other side, I guess, playing, the Dixie, Bonnie Blue, Maryland, My Maryland. And they were all excited to sing it, but they were pretty tore up. They were real tattered. They were a real scarecrow army at this point. Even though victorious, they were really worn out bad. Their attrition is just really crazy. And they're scared. They really are a lot of barefoot. It's really more destitute than any other time, by far, more than Appomattox. And they're stone bruised. And they just grumble when they get to the other side of the river. And he said the sole thing that kept them hobbling along to Frederick, Maryland, was cherishing the thought of getting to Baltimore to shoot Yankees and blacks ad lib. But he doesn't say blacks. So, with that word being so sensitive nowadays, and this guy saying, I want to go into Baltimore and shoot them up, Yankees and blacks. That's heavy duty, and that's awkward because I like this guy, and so I vacillated on publishing it because he said that, and that's one of the reasons why I was hesitant with him, because he doesn't say that in his Neil published book that the manuscript's based on, the 1905 one. And so I struggled with that. But then I thought, I went up to Arlington Cemetery and went to his grave, and I talked to him. It was a lopsided conversation. Can't have much conversation with somebody that's not around. But I spoke to him, and I said, I want to publish this stuff, and I hope you don't hate me for it, but this is what you say, and somebody's going to publish it at some point. So I feel like somebody that's friendly to him should publish it. And so that's what I did in America's Civil War magazine maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, Robert Lee, as an editor, sometimes you can use judiciously ellipses. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can just eliminate some things that, if you wish, as an editor.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing I struggled with. Like, I told a friend of mine about this years ago, and I said, well, Hunter writes this, and he said, oh, you can't publish that. And that was kind of an instinct in a way, but then I thought, well, that's what he said. It is what it is.
That's what it is. But what is the most important? What is the most important thing that he said? And that would be something that would go through my mind. Well, I think we're going to have to close it down now. I thought maybe Glenn Carroll, our president of Hood's Texas Brigade Association, might want to have a few remarks. I'm going to unmute him, or ask him to unmute if he wishes to.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Martha's covered real well our seminar coming up. We're very excited about that. I know some of you are planning to come, and you're welcome, even at this late date. The main thing we need to know is if you're able to come, we can count you in our head count for the materials and the food that we're having for lunch. So we've put like a November 1st date for the cutoff. So you're not too late. The hotel that's in our flyer has booked up for the rooms that we've reserved, but I believe there's a Comfort Inn and there's several other hotels in the area. You're welcome to come down. So anybody who has that opportunity, do so. And I also want to put in a plug for our website. If you go to hoodstexasbrigade.org, you can see some of the activities we're doing, information on the tour and the seminar, and we want to encourage you to come because you'll enjoy the camaraderie. But if you can't, we also, with the help of Johnny Anderson, who's in attendance tonight, and most helpful, we post the speakers from some of the previous seminars, and you're welcome to go there and hear these speakers, and you'll just see how good they are. And we've enjoyed doing this, and look forward to anyone who can come and attend. And if you can't make the seminar, start looking at the date in April and think about a tour, because our tours have gone over very well. We started years ago at the sesquicentennial, so we ought to do something. Let's go where the Texans go. And they went so well, we've planned those over the years. And of course, when COVID hit, we had to stop doing those for a bit, but we're doing them again, and we're real excited about this upcoming tour.